Hey guys, tonight we're diving straight into a time when beauty wasn't just a preference, it was survival. Not Instagram survival, mind you. Actual survival. Like, if you looked the wrong way, someone might think you were possessed, a witch, or worse, a peasant. You're about to find yourself in the heart of a medieval town. No, not the romanticized castle in the sunset kind. I mean the muddy streets, smoky air, people don't bathe regularly kind. And in this world, your face, your very face, is your passport, your reputation, and sometimes your greatest liability. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I love seeing all the sleepy cities lighting up across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your foot sinks into something with a soft squelch. Not a landmine, just mud. Or, possibly not just mud. You're standing at the edge of a small town called Grimer Village. You're wearing a coarse, grayish linen dress that smells faintly of smoke and damp straw. The breeze brings you a mixed bouquet of roasted bread, cow dung, and burning wood. You can't quite tell if you're hungry or nauseous. You've only been here for 5 minutes, and already you're getting the sense that this century has a very different definition of presentable. Here, women don't have serums, micellar water, or face filters. Just a constant, invisible pressure. A collective gaze. Judging, scanning, whispering. You haven't even asked for directions yet, and already an older woman by a well is looking at you like you're some sort of peculiar livestock. You quickly realize something. You need to understand what beauty means in this world. And fast. Because if you don't look right, people don't just unfollow you, they might accuse you of sorcery or suggest a long stay at the convent. You wander toward the market, hoping to catch a glimpse of local fashion trends. At the first stall, you spot a young woman wearing a tight-sleeved gown with a towering hair arrangement. Her face is so pale it borders on translucent, but her lips have a hint of reddish tint. Rumor has it that's made from a mix of clay and ox liver. She's squinting into a piece of polished copper. Yes, that's the mirror. A sheet of burnished metal. You peer into one for yourself and flinch. The reflection is vague, almost ghostly. Just a shimmer of light and shadow. That's when it hits you. You have absolutely no idea what you look like. In a world with no real mirrors, no reliable light, and no social media selfies, who you are is whatever other people decide they see. Someone says you're beautiful, you are. If someone says you look like a wild woodland temptress, you may need to fast, confess, or give up your apron to make amends. You shuffle into a small shop selling trinkets. The air smells like dried lavender and animal fat. Behind the counter sits a wrinkled old woman chewing on something that suspiciously resembles a dried tobacco leaf. She gives you one slow, disapproving look and says, "Those eyebrows?" No. You instinctively touch your forehead. What about your eyebrows? Too thick? Too thin? 21st century? She points to a jar of white powder in the corner. Pluck it. Smooth it. Only then will the Virgin Mary bless you. You begin to understand. This isn't beauty advice. It's a moral obligation. In this world, beauty isn't self-expression. It's social currency, moral standing, and even theological alignment. You glance down at your muddy hem and scuffed shoes, then look around at women with delicate veils, pearl hairnets, and ghost-pale cheeks. You feel that ancient primal weight settle on your shoulders. Comparison. And this, sadly, is just the beginning. You've been given lodging with an old seamstress and her 2 daughters. They're about your age, but their skin is startlingly pale, their hair tightly wound into intricate braids. You lie awake on a straw-stuffed mattress, listening as the sisters whisper in the next room. Did you see her forehead? Still has hair on it. Not even shaved. You instinctively reach up. Your forehead? Yes, in case you didn't get the memo, high foreheads are fashionable right now, because they make you look holy, wise, and angelic. Some noble women even pluck the front row of their hairline so it never grows back. Honestly, in a few years they might invent brow implants just to fix this. You let out a silent, tired laugh, but only in your head. Smiling out loud might get you judged for having crooked teeth. Or worse, smiling too much. You're starting to see a pattern. Beauty here isn't just exhausting. It's a high-stakes test you never studied for. The next morning, you're sent to help at the local market. Clusters of women are exchanging eggs, milk, gossip, and surprisingly advanced cosmetic advice. Lead powder, dear. Mix it with beeswax so it won't crack. Don't listen to her. Too much lead and your nose will fall off. Wait, what? Beeswax? You realize they're discussing medieval makeup recipes. Yup, these women have been doing toxic skincare since long before TikTok. They use white lead, crushed charcoal, sheep fat, and even pigeon droppings to achieve that elusive, noble glow. Some of them know it's dangerous. Some don't. Some just don't care anymore. You overhear one woman say, "If I don't wear it, no man will look twice. I'd rather lose a few teeth than die alone." You stand quietly in the corner watching. And you start to wonder, do they actually like these beauty standards? Or are they just surviving them? Before you can answer, an older woman approaches you. She lifts your chin, peers into your face like she's evaluating a horse, then nods slowly. Salvageable. You blink. She hands you a lump of beeswax. Come back tomorrow. We'll fix you. In the Middle Ages, the real danger wasn't being unattractive. It was being wrong. You weren't chasing beauty. You were avoiding failure. Because a woman's appearance wasn't a personal project. It was a reflection of her community, her class, her piety, and her usefulness. Even today, historians are still debating. Did medieval women have agency over their appearance? Some argue yes. After all, they developed techniques far ahead of their time. Others say no. The beauty ideals were crafted to control them, not empower them. You stare into the surface of a well, watching your face ripple in the water. A cloud passes overhead. The moonlight flickers. You remember what you used to look like, but that face feels far away now. You're one of them now. And to survive here, you'll have to play the game. You wake up before sunrise. Mostly because the rooster is having a personal crisis right outside your window. But also because someone is yanking the scratchy wool blanket off of you. "Get up," says the seamstress's older daughter, already dressed, her eyebrows suspiciously absent and her forehead gleaming like a polished plate. Market day. You blink in the half-darkness, trying to remember where and when you are. Then it hits you. You're still in Grimer Village. It's still the 14th century. And apparently you're about to be introduced to the sacred medieval art of brow maintenance. The village square is already humming with activity. Baskets thump down on cobblestones. Chickens run for their lives. You're herded, gently but with purpose, into a side room of a spice merchant's house that's been temporarily converted into a ladies' station. Which sounds fancier than it is. It's really just a smoky little room with three-legged stools, bad lighting, and the lingering smell of lavender and sheep. You're not here to buy things. You're here to be made appropriate. The first item on the agenda, your eyebrows. Now let's be clear. Medieval eyebrows are a moving target. If you're in Florence, thin and delicate. In England, shaved off entirely, paired with a shining expanse of forehead so holy looking it might bless the person across from you. In your current location, somewhere in between. Just enough brow to show you're civilized, not so much that you look wild. A matronly woman with a basket of questionable tools waves you over. She's got tweezers the size of garden shears and a bowl of something warm and sticky, honey wax, allegedly. Or maybe tree sap. You don't ask. Sit, she says. Don't flinch, or you'll end up lopsided. You sit. You flinch. You regret everything. The first rip of wax is an out-of-body experience. You hear the birds outside. You smell rosemary and burning hair. You wonder if eyebrows are truly necessary for survival. As your new forehead emerges, smooth and eerily large, the room collectively approves. A few girls even compliment you. "You've got a noble dome," one says, nodding with genuine admiration. You smile awkwardly, hoping no one notices your trembling eyelids. That's when you spot a girl sitting near the fire, hunched and quietly crying. Her face is red and blotchy. One of her brows is half gone. "She moved too much," someone whispers. "Ruined it." You suddenly realize how fragile this whole system is. One twitch, one sneeze, one moment of doubt, and you go from fashionable to public embarrassment. And in this world, embarrassment doesn't just hurt. It lingers. People talk. People remember. Especially about brows. After your procedure, you're handed a thin veil to drape over your head. Not to hide the pain, though it helps, but because veils are fashionable, modest, and serve to frame the face in the best possible way. You look in the burnished mirror again. The face staring back is familiar but altered. Softer. Smoother. A little stunned. You don't recognize yourself fully, but everyone else nods approvingly, so you decide to go with it. For now. Later that day, you're sent to help out at the local parish. The nuns there have their own ideas about beauty. Not the powdered and plucked kind, but the holy kind. Inner light, they call it. You listen politely as one of them explains how true beauty is modesty, humility, and the gentle pursuit of divine grace. Then you glance down and notice her eyebrows are immaculate. You're starting to understand a very medieval contradiction. Beauty is supposed to be natural and humble, as long as it's meticulously curated. One of the nuns gives you a tiny book, hand-copied, delicately illustrated, smelling faintly of wax and old leather. It's a woman's devotional, full of prayers, herbal recipes, and moral guidelines. There's even a section on how to care for one's face so as to reflect the purity of the soul. You read it with interest. Some tips are harmless. Wash with rose water, avoid sleeping angry. Others are suspicious. Rub mashed snails upon the forehead to prevent sinful dreams. Place a holy relic beneath the pillow to cleanse the skin of pride. Never gaze into a mirror during Lent. You raise an eyebrow. Or you would if you still had them. That night, back in your room, you sit on the edge of your straw bed, running a finger gently along your forehead. It's still tender. You wonder how long you'll have to keep this up. Because here's the secret no one tells you up front. Beauty in the Middle Ages isn't a goal. It's a routine, a ritual, a daily reaffirmation that you belong. And your eyebrows? They're not just facial features. They're a message. A flag, a resume. They say, "I know the rules. I'm not dangerous. I won't disturb the peace." They say, "I am trying very, very hard to survive here." Somewhere across the village, you hear a man yell and a dog bark in reply. A cow moos. It's bedtime in Grimer village. You blow out your candle. You close your eyes. And somewhere deep in your medieval brain, you hear a quiet little voice whisper, "Maybe tomorrow I'll try the mashed snails." Just maybe. Your eyes snap open just before dawn. Again. It's becoming a pattern, this half-sleep state you now inhabit. You're not sure if it's the straw mattress poking your spine, the cold draft from the cracked shutters, or just the constant mental background noise of wondering whether your forehead still meets the week's beauty standards. But today's not about eyebrows. Today you face a new medieval obsession. Your hair. Not just its length or color, though yes, that matters, but how it's covered, arranged, braided, concealed, revealed, and symbolically loaded with more meaning than an entire Shakespeare soliloquy. You're still rubbing the sleep from your eyes when the seamstress's younger daughter dumps a bundle of cloth on your lap. "Hurry up," she says. "You can't go out with your hair showing." You blink down at the fabric. It's a coif, a sort of soft bonnet. Plain, practical, and slightly itchy. "But my hair's clean," you say, which frankly took considerable effort last night, involving lukewarm water, rosemary, and one terrified goose. "Doesn't matter," she says. "No one wants to see a respectable woman's hair." You pause. This again. Modesty equals invisible. In the Middle Ages, hair is power and danger. and sexuality, and holiness, all tangled together. If you're married, your hair must be fully covered. A veil, a coif, a wimple, or some combination of the above. Exposed hair? Scandalous. If you're a nun, your hair is shaved off when you take your vows. A symbol of humility, piety, and giving up earthly vanity. Though some nuns, according to a few juicy side notes in history, secretly tucked scented herbs into their veils. For God's glory, of course. If you're unmarried but of age, your hair is probably long, parted in the middle, and intricately braided or twisted into loops. But again, covered in public. Always. You, for the record, are technically single. But since no one here knows your modern relationship status or what situationship even means, you're being filed under possible spinster, which means mild veil, strict side-eye. The coif doesn't go on gracefully. It's like trying to wear a fabric taco shell while blindfolded. Your host sister sighs and comes over to fix it, jabbing pins into your scalp with unsettling speed and accuracy. There, she says. Now you don't look immoral. That's the highest compliment you've received all week. You make your way to the village square. The market is bustling again, wool, cheese, bread, gossip. But you're on a mission. Because earlier you heard whispers about a lady in the manor house who knows everything about hair, braiding, oils, even herbal dyeing. You head there now, ducking past carts and cows, trying not to trip on your own veil. The manor is imposing. Stone walls, iron gates, guarded by two deeply uninterested dogs. You're led inside by a maid who raises her eyebrows at your coif, then mutters, "Well, at least it's clean." In this century, clean is a luxury, a rare one. You're taken to an upstairs room filled with woven tapestries, cushioned chairs, and that faint smell of lavender and onions. Sitting by the window is her, Lady Adeland. She's probably in her late 30s, basically ancient by village standards, but she radiates the kind of confidence that comes from surviving childbirth, 3 plagues, and 20 years of hot wax hair removal. Her hair, you notice, is a marvel. Parted like a perfect line from God himself, twisted into symmetrical side coils, and tucked into 2 fine mesh coverings adorned with small pearls. A medieval snood. Basically, chainmail for your head. But elegant. She eyes you with a practiced gaze and says, "Let's see what you've got." You sit. She unties your coif. There's a moment of silence. Then she says, "Not terrible. A bit dry. And you've got a stubborn parting. But manageable." You're flattered. In the way a medieval peasant might be flattered to hear they don't resemble a barn goat. As she starts working with your hair, she talks. And talks. You learn that rosemary boiled in wine makes an excellent rinse. That sage rubbed on the scalp allegedly keeps thoughts pure. That women in noble courts sometimes dye their hair golden using lye, ashes, and long sun exposure. That some even wear false hairpieces sewn from horsehair or other women's discarded locks. You gasp. Wait, wigs? Extensions? She corrects you. It's a family heirloom. Of course it is. You ask her if women ever cut their hair short. She looks horrified. Not unless you're taking holy vows. Or punishment. Or madness. Turns out, hair length equals morality. Long hair is womanly, virtuous, fertile. Short hair? Scandalous, rebellious, possibly demonic. Even widows keep their long hair tied under layers of mourning cloth. Because you never know, God might send a second husband and you'll need to look the part. As the sun sets, Lady Adeline finishes your hair with a final braid, tight and elegant. She wraps it in a fine cloth and pins it expertly. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a piece of polished glass. You look composed, regal, slightly taller somehow. You thank her. She smiles. Remember, your hair says everything before your mouth does. Keep it clean. Keep it covered. And if a man compliments it, send for a chaperone. Duly noted. That night, back in your tiny room, you gently unwrap your head. Your scalp is sore. Your hair smells like rosemary and smoke. But there's something oddly comforting about the care you received today. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't only about appearances. Maybe it was about connection, ritual, trust. Because in a world where women don't get to speak loudly or move freely, your hair is one of the few things you actually get to control. Mostly. Kind of. Well, if Lady Adeline approves. Modern historians still debate how much autonomy medieval women had over their grooming. Some argue that beauty routines were a form of resistance, a way to assert identity in a society that rarely let them speak. Others say they were just another cage wrapped in pearls and rosemary oil. You lie in bed, hair neatly braided, veil folded beside you. And you wonder, was it self-care? Or was it survival? Then your eyes drift shut. And you dream, not of princes or dragons, but of losing all your hair in a strong wind. You wake up 10 seconds later to make sure it's still there. It is. Barely. It's raining when you wake up. Not a poetic drizzle. Not a romantic fog. No, this is a medieval soak your soul through your socks kind of rain. You open one eye and immediately regret it. The roof is leaking again. Your blanket smells like wet sheep. And your right foot is somehow damp even though it was under the blanket all night. But none of that matters right now. Because today's challenge is not about eyebrows or hair. It's about your skin. Yes, your glorious, mortal, oil-producing, occasionally pimpled medieval skin. Let's start with the basics. Skincare in the 14th century is complicated. You're not dealing with a shelf full of serums and jade rollers. There's no sunscreen, no moisturizer, no 5-step glow-up routine. What you have is rainwater if you're lucky, rosewater if you're rich, goat's milk if you're daring, and a whole list of natural ingredients that sound more like a witch's lunch order than a facial. This morning you're sent to fetch herbs from the healer's cottage. Not because you're sick, but because apparently your complexion is city pale. Which, fun fact, used to be a compliment. Pale skin equals not having to work outside equals status. But in this village, too pale means you look suspicious, while too tan says you don't have a husband yet. You truly can't win. So now you're off to get help from Mistress Anwin, the local herbalist. You slip and slide your way through the mud, your veil clinging to your head like a sad noodle. By the time you reach her door, you are 60% water and 40% regret. Mistress Anwin is a wiry woman with more wrinkles than years, and a voice like cold butter scraped across dry bread. She eyes you, then your face, then your boots. She says, "You need time." You're not sure if that's a pun, but she disappears into the back of her cottage before you can respond. She returns holding a mortar and pestle, a sack of dried herbs, and something that looks suspiciously like mashed beans. Sit. This'll draw out the damp. You don't know what that means. You sit anyway. She starts grinding the herbs together, muttering under her breath. You catch words like chamomile, yarrow, witch hazel, and worryingly, fermented frog spit. You later learn that last one is just a nickname for a plant. Hopefully. The resulting paste is slathered onto your face with wild confidence. It is cold. It smells like a salad gone rogue. But you hold still because apparently movement releases the humors. She tells you to leave it on for 30 minutes, or until a chicken lays an egg, whichever comes first. While you wait, Mistress Anwin shares her thoughts on medieval skincare. Milk's good for the skin, but sour milk's better, she says. Bites the blemishes right off. Egg whites tighten the skin. Makes you look younger. Or terrified. Want smoother cheeks? Rub them with a cold cabbage leaf. Want to impress a knight? Suck on licorice until your breath smells like virtue. You nod slowly. You're not sure if you're becoming beautiful or being slowly marinated. Historians still argue about just how widespread medieval skincare practices were. Some say only noble women had access to herbs, oils, and mirrors. Others point out that even peasant girls knew the value of nettle water and morning dew. There's even one 14th century diary entry from a nun who claimed she had no vanity in her heart, but still used crushed pearls in case Jesus visited. You're starting to understand. Skincare even back then wasn't really about looking good. It was about looking prepared. Prepared for God, gossip, or grim courtship prospects. Mistress Anwen finally wipes your face clean with a damp linen cloth. You brace for pain. Instead, your skin feels soft, strangely tingly, slightly like parsley. She hands you a small pot of salve. It smells faintly of honey and regret. Apply it before bed, she says. Keeps your spirit from escaping through your pores. You're not entirely sure that's how spirits work, but you thank her anyway. Back at the cottage, the seamstress and her daughters inspect your newly treated face. She glows, says one. She smells like soup, says the other. You smile anyway. You don't care, because for the first time in days your skin doesn't itch. You lie back on your bed that night with a thick layer of salve on your cheeks, your forehead, and just a little dab on your chin for good luck. The candle flickers. You close your eyes, and you dream of cabbage leaves and licorice breath, which frankly beats dreaming about eyebrow wax. And here's a fun historical twist. Despite all the effort medieval women put into their skin, mirrors were rare and small. Most couldn't even see their full face at once. So they went by feel, by ritual, by memory, or just asked a friend, "Do I look like sin today?" And so, in this chapter of your medieval life, you learn a key truth. You may not have serums. You may not have Sephora. But you do have time. And that's something. The rooster doesn't crow this morning. No poetic wake-up call. No distant echo of farm life. Just silence. Followed by the unmistakable sound of someone yelling, "She fainted in the chapel again." You sit up, blinking the sleep out of your eyes. Your face still feels a little cabbagey from last night's salve, but today you've got other concerns. Because right now you're about to face one of the deadliest medieval beauty trends of all. The corset. Well, technically, tight lacing, but you'll get there. You stretch your arms, hear about 6 joints crack, and shuffle over to the small mirror shard balanced on the wall beam. You're pale, slightly frizzy, and for now, still breathing comfortably. Enjoy that. It won't last. The seamstress calls you down. Today, she says, you're helping her deliver a commission to the lady of a nearby estate. And guess what? You need to look presentable, she says, already holding up a bodice that looks like it came from a medieval armory sale. You try to object. "Can I just wear my usual?" "No," she cuts in. "It's a noble house. We can't have you flopping around like a sack of onions." Harsh, but not inaccurate. You stare at the bodice. It's stiff. It's structured. It has so many laces, it looks like it was designed by someone who hated the concept of lungs. Now let's clear something up. The word corset, as we know it, doesn't fully take hold until later centuries. In your time period, it's more accurate to call it a kirtle with supportive bodice, or a stomacher, or if you're feeling spicy, a linen torture sandwich. But regardless of its name, the goal is the same. Shape the female body into something vaguely noble, vertical, and symbolically obedient. Straight posture equals moral virtue. Small waist equals big dowry. Visible discomfort? Optional bonus. You stand still as the seamstress laces you in. At first it's fine. Snug, even comforting. Then she pulls tighter. And tighter. Until your ribs whisper, "Hey, we didn't agree to this." You try to breathe shallowly. Your shoulders are pinned back. Your chest is lifted. Your waist, previously friendly and soft, is now a cautious suggestion of its former self. "Now hold that," she says. You try. You fail. You cough. "Don't faint in front of the nobles," she warns. It's tacky. Here's what you learn as you stumble toward the manor house, spine locked at a 90-degree angle to the universe. Medieval beauty standards didn't demand hourglass curves like later eras. They often favored a long torso, flat chest, narrow hips, and soft pale features. But among the upper class, a tight bodice signified wealth, because only rich women could afford not to move freely. Working women? They wore simpler, looser garments that let them breathe, bend, and lift buckets of turnips. But noble women? They laced, and posed, and sometimes fainted, ideally onto something embroidered. By the time you arrive at the manor, your lower back has filed a complaint with God. A young noblewoman greets you. She's wearing layers of silk and linen, topped with a jewel-trimmed overdress. You count at least 3 separate lacing systems on her outfit. She looks like a pastry. A very expensive, very restricted pastry. She smiles, barely, and gestures for you to follow. And you do. Because turning your head hurts more than agreeing. Inside the manor's dressing room, she lets you sit, bless her, and offers a cup of wine, double bless her. She's excited to try on the new garment the seamstress brought. But before she changes, she shows you her vanity chest. You peek. Inside, the beeswax for smoothing brows, crushed alabaster powder for skin, a strip of linen soaked in vinegar to wrap around the waist and melt inches away, her words not sciences. A pressed flower from a boy she met once, is brown and kinda sad. You know, she says, my mother used to say if I fainted I was finally doing it right. You raise your eyebrows. That seems dangerous? She shrugs. What's beauty without a little drama? You nod politely while mentally wondering if drama includes slowly losing circulation in both legs. While she changes behind a curtain, you overhear her talking to her maid about a cousin who bruised her ribs last month during a feast. She leaned too far to pick up a cherry, she says, giggling. Popped a seam and everything. Fashion risks were real. Historians still debate how extreme medieval bodice lacing actually was. Some argue that tight lacing to the point of fainting was rare and exaggerated, more common in Renaissance and later centuries. Others point to contemporary illustrations and writings that hint women were absolutely binding themselves tightly, for posture, appearance, or just to keep up with courtly standards. Either way, you're now part of that long, laced-up lineage of women who looked fabulous while low-key suffering. Back at the village, you finally undo the bodice. The breath you take feels like a spiritual awakening. Your ribs expand. Your stomach sags with relief. You feel like a raisin rehydrating in real time. The seamstress watches you. You looked elegant, she says, except for the part where your eyes almost rolled back. You nod dazed. Thank you. She hands you a roll of linen. What's this, you ask? For tomorrow. We're wrapping your legs. Apparently the shepherd's daughter says it smooths out the calves. You blink. Why do they need to be smooth? She shrugs. Just in case someone sees your ankles during a flood. Of course. Totally normal concern. That night as you lie in bed, you swear you can still feel the corset's ghost pressing gently into your spleen. You roll to your side. Immediately regret it. Roll back. Was it beautiful? Maybe. Was it worth it? The jury's out. But now you understand something else. In the medieval world, beauty isn't just something you are. It's something you perform. With layers. With posture. With careful discomfort. A language you wear, not speak. You close your eyes and dream of a future where sweatpants exist. You are not ready for this. You've braved herbal salves. You've survived tight bodices. You've even accepted that your eyebrows might one day be singed for beauty. But this is teeth day. Or more accurately, mouth aesthetics in the Middle Ages. A chapter that'll have you clutching your molars and rethinking every sip of mead. It starts innocently. You're eating porridge by the hearth, trying to ignore the fact that it tastes like sadness and slightly wet oats, when the blacksmith's niece walks in. She smiles. And you flinch. Because her teeth are jet black. Like, just chewed ink black. And that's when the seamstress whispers, it's the new trend. Looks delicate. You blink. Delicate? She nods. It means she doesn't eat sweets. Or she eats so many sweets she's rich enough not to care about rot. You're confused and mildly concerned. So let's set the historical table here. In much of Europe during the medieval period, dental care was, well, theory. Toothbrushes? Not really a thing. Toothpaste? Kinda. There were powders made from burnt rosemary, crushed mint, and salt. If you were really fancy, you'd mix in honey or powdered oyster shell. Floss? Please. You were lucky to have all your teeth past 30. But did people care about the way their teeth looked? Surprisingly, yes. Let's talk about one of the stranger trends. In some regions, blackened teeth were considered attractive, especially in the later medieval and early modern periods, and particularly in cultures like Japan. Now in Europe, that didn't quite catch on the same way. But weirdly enough, rotting teeth did start to become associated with wealth, because sugar was a luxury. If you had cavities, it meant you could afford sweets. So aristocrats didn't necessarily hide their decaying teeth, they flaunted them. You're currently somewhere between wheat ration peasant and chic servant girl, so you don't eat much sugar. Your teeth are, so far, decently solid. But the problem is, they're also visible. And in your world, visibility is vulnerability. The lady of the manor is coming to visit the village today. You're told very directly, you must not offend her with your mouth, which is an intense way to phrase, please smile politely. The seamstress hands you a small jar to whiten your teeth. You open it. It smells like chalk, mint, and a hint of despair. It's crushed bones and sage, she explains. Scrub gently. You stare at her. I said gently. So now you're crouched behind the cottage, rubbing a rag covered in ancient powder across your teeth. It is deeply unpleasant. It's gritty. It tastes like peppered gravel. And you're fairly sure at least one ingredient in this mixture used to be alive. But when you rinse your mouth with cold well water, your teeth feel smoother? You run your tongue across them. It's like licking dry porcelain. You smile experimentally. Still looks like you. Except now your gums are slightly bleeding. Don't smile too wide, the seamstress advises. You'll look unhinged. Dental beauty wasn't just about cleanliness. It was also about smell. Oh yes, medieval halitosis was a thing, and it was feared. People chewed cloves, fennel, or parsley not just for taste but to mask breath that could melt lead. One medieval guide advised boiling wine with cinnamon and swishing it in the mouth each morning. Not a bad gig if you ignore the dental corrosion. Another method? Chewing tree bark. Yes, tree bark. Specifically birch or elm, which were thought to cool the humors and tighten loose teeth. You haven't lost any teeth yet, but after this morning scrub, you're not ruling it out. And then comes the rinse. Today's village healer, who now seems suspiciously like a part-time dentist, hands you a vial of green-tinted liquid. You raise an eyebrow. What's in it? Vinegar. Crushed goose feather. A whisper of lye. A whisper? She nods sagely. If it stings, it's working. You take a sip. It burns. Not in a gentle, refreshing way, but in a did I just gargle fire way. Your eyes water. Your soul briefly exits your body. But when you finish, the healer gives you a nod of approval. You smell slightly less mortal, she says. You're not sure whether to say thank you or apologize to God. Historical debate time. Did medieval people really care that much about their teeth? Some scholars argue that poor dental hygiene was universal and not worth noting. Others point to 13th and 14th century texts that included recipes for tooth beauty, advice on whitening, and breath-freshening charms. In short, the jury's still out. But what is clear? Medieval folks didn't equate bad breath with bad manners. They equated it with bad health. And health? That was a moral issue. Back in the village square, the noble visitors arrive. You keep your mouth mostly closed. Smile just enough. Don't reveal the bleeding gum in the back. Don't show the missing molar you secretly lost last month to a stale barley biscuit. One of the visiting ladies smiles at you. Her teeth are pearly and perfect. Probably because she owns the only ivory toothbrush for 50 miles. You smile back, awkward and minty. She gives you a look. You can't tell if it's approval or quiet dental judgment. Later that night, You swish a little warm water and salt in your mouth and lie back on your straw-stuffed pillow. You wonder what your breath smells like now. Rosemary and regret? Sage and second chances? You close your eyes, mouth slightly open. And somewhere, a ghost of crushed oyster shells laughs gently in the wind. And the lesson from this episode? In a world without dentists, without Novocaine, without x-rays or floss, beauty is what doesn't kill your smile. Or at least not right away. Today's lesson begins with a sharp stick, a shallow breath, and a hairline that's about to be personally victimized. Because hey, tonight we're exploring a medieval beauty standard so odd, so forehead-focused, it makes you question the entire geometry of your face. Yeah. Tonight it's all about the fashionably high hairline. You're helping wash linens by the river when your friend Alice sidles up to you with a conspiratorial whisper. My cousin's going for it. You squint. Going for what? Alice raises her eyebrows, then slowly draws her fingers across her forehead and back into her hairline. Oh no, you say. Oh yes, she grins. Her cousin, Isabeau, is about to pluck her way to medieval fabulousness. Because in your world, the highest form of elegance isn't cheekbones, lips, or even skin, it's forehead real estate. Picture this. It's the 14th century. You're a lady of the court. You've got a gown embroidered with 4,000 tiny birds no one can identify. You've just sat for a miniature portrait. What's the ultimate sign that you're a refined, elite, dangerously fashionable woman? A forehead that could double as a landing strip for falcons. The ideal medieval face was shaped like an elongated oval, smooth and pale, with soft features and an ethereal quality that basically said, I am too delicate to know where potatoes come from. A high, broad forehead symbolized purity, intelligence, and aristocratic breeding, which meant women began removing hair from their temples and hairlines to artificially elongate their faces. Yes, you heard that right. Hair removal. From your scalp. Voluntarily. So Isabeau invites you to watch. Because obviously you're the emotional support friend now. She sits on a stool by the hearth. Alice helps pin back her remaining hair. A small pot of warm water simmers beside her, along with the tool. You stare at it. It's not fancy. Just a smooth little stick, tipped with a single bad idea. Okay, fine, it's a medieval tweezer. Isabeau dabs warm water along her hairline. Then the plucking begins. And it is, in a word, grim. You watch as hair after hair is yanked from her scalp. Her face remains frozen in the courtly, ladylike expression she was trained to maintain, but you can see the pain behind her eyes. The "why am I doing this?" panic flashing every time a particularly stubborn strand refuses to go quietly. This is fine, she says through a locked jaw. Totally. Let's pause here for a historical flashcard. Hair plucking wasn't exclusive to the upper class, but it was most commonly seen among noble women who had the time and money to maintain the look. You had to keep redoing it as hair grew back. No razors. No lasers. Just endless plucking. To soften the skin and prevent inflammation, women used salves made of rose water, almond oil, or goose fat. If that failed, aloe and silent weeping. You ask Isabeau mid-session if she's sure this is what she wants. She doesn't answer. She's busy trying not to scream as Alice reaches for her temple. Some historians believe women also used cloth strips soaked in vinegar and egg white to help pull the hair out en masse, kind of like proto-waxing. Others suggest that lime and arsenic were sometimes used to chemically burn off stubborn hair. And yes, arsenic is very bad for you. But in the Middle Ages, it was basically skincare's chaotic cousin. After what feels like a small eternity, Isabeau steps back from the firelight and turns her head. Her forehead now starts at what used to be the middle of her scalp. Alice gasps. You look like the Queen of Heaven. You think she looks like she's seen things. But hey, beauty. You don't say anything unkind. Instead, you hand her the rose water. She sniffs it and immediately bursts into tears. Later, in the quiet of your own cottage, you catch your reflection in a bit of polished metal. Your forehead is perfectly average. Normal hairline. Slight widow's peak. A smudge of soot on your cheek, probably from lighting the hearth. You press your fingers to your brow. Do you need to do it too? You imagine yourself slowly tweezing your way to elegance. Your scalp recoils. It's not just foreheads either. Medieval Europe saw all kinds of facial beauty ideals that involved editing your natural look, often with wildly creative and occasionally hazardous techniques. Thin, arched eyebrows were ideal in many courts. So if your brows were naturally thick, out came the tweezers again. Or burnt walnut paste to thin the line. Pale, luminous skin was essential, so women often applied lead-based powder to their faces, leading to, slow poisoning. Lead, still not your friend. And hair itself? Long, wavy, and preferably golden, even if you weren't born blonde. Enter saffron rinses, sun exposure, and in some cases urine bleaching. Yes, you read that right. The line between innovation and horror was incredibly thin. Back in Isabeau's cottage, she's wrapped her head in a silk scarf to protect the raw skin. She's smiling now, a little woozy, but proud. You think they'll notice? She asks. You nod. They won't see anything else. That night, as you both lie on straw mats under the same roof, she whispers, "Do you think this will make me seem clever?" You pause. You're not sure if she's asking you herself or the stars overhead. But after a long moment, you answer honestly, "No." Then softer, "But they'll believe it anyway. Because here's the thing. In your world, beauty isn't about what's true. It's about what looks correct. A high forehead doesn't actually mean you're wise. But it says, I know the rules. I follow the script. I'm part of the world that matters." And sometimes that's enough. Even if it means surrendering a chunk of your scalp to the trend gods. You roll over and close your eyes. Your own hairline still untouched. But maybe not forever. Because tomorrow is another day. And fashion? Fashion never sleeps. So you've survived herbal face bleach, poison-based skin care, meat-based lipstick, don't ask, and most recently your best friend's tragic but courageous forehead-plucking adventure. Tonight things get fluffier, or rather, puffier. Because now we're diving into the glorious, ridiculous world of medieval hair volume. Specifically, how the women of your era turned their heads into something resembling a cross between a swan, a tower, and a medieval pastry. Yes, tonight we're going to explore the wild height of medieval hairstyles, how women built their hair into gravity-defying structures and what those styles said about their place in society, their marriage prospects, and occasionally their sanity. It starts with a comb. No, actually, it starts with a rat. Okay, not a literal rat, though those existed too, but a hair rat made of extra locks or sometimes even animal fur, bundled up into a soft little puffball. You're helping braid a noblewoman's hair this morning, and the maid you're assisting hands you one of these puffs with zero explanation. You hold it delicately like it might bite. "What is this?" She shrugs. "Padding." You raise an eyebrow. "For a shoe." She cackles. "For her crown." You now realize this isn't hairdressing. It's structural engineering. The noblewoman in question is Lady Claire, a woman with a swan-like neck, an expression of permanent disappointment, and about 14 strands of her own actual hair. She's seated before a mirror that's polished within an inch of its life. Your job: help turn her into a vision of courtly perfection. Which, in her case, means something tall, braided, and vaguely architectural. You start by smoothing what little hair she has left with a mixture of rosemary oil and boiled nettle extract. It smells like a wet salad but works wonders. Then comes the rat. Then another. Then a coiled structure that looks suspiciously like a linen donut. "Don't forget the wire," the maid mutters beside you. "Wait, wire?" "Yes, for the veil support." You blink. This is no longer hairstyling. This is scaffolding. Let's pause here for context. In medieval Europe, especially during the 14th and 15th centuries, elaborate headgear and hairstyles were all the rage, particularly among the upper classes. Women wore their hair in towering braided coils, horned headdresses called hennins, think Princess Leia meets traffic cone, or heart-shaped styles that required serious internal support. These weren't just pretty, they were status symbols. The higher your hair, the closer to nobility. Literally. You couldn't not notice someone who walked into the room looking like their head was its own building. Now you're elbow deep in pins, braids, and silks, and Lady Claire is breathing down your neck. She wants more height. You suggest maybe not adding a third rat. She narrows her eyes. Do you want me to look common? Right. Silly you. So you keep stacking. By the time you're done, she looks like she could pick up radio signals from another duchy. But you know what? It works. She stands, inspects herself, and, surprise of surprises, smiles. Not bad, she murmurs. Almost worthy of court. You look at her and briefly consider asking if her neck is okay under all that weight. Then decide, not your business. But it's not just noble women who care about their hair. Even in the villages, style matters. Sure, peasant women aren't out here wearing foot-high hennins, but they still braid, loop, and twist their hair in carefully coded ways. Too long braids? You're unmarried. A thick bun wrapped in linen? Married, no kids. A half wrap with braids poking out? Widow. But maybe looking. Hair tells a story. And it's not just about who you are, it's also about what you're allowed to be. In some places, religious orders dictated how much hair could be shown in public. Married women were expected to cover theirs. Virgin girls could leave it flowing for festivals. And if your hair was curly, God help you. Some medieval theologians literally argued that curly hair suggested a disordered soul. Because clearly, split ends are a gateway to sin. One Italian text from the 15th century described curly-haired women as chaotic in spirit and hard to discipline. Scholars still debate whether this was literal or just misogynistic poetry, but either way, you've definitely seen some monks side-eye your friend with the spiral curls. Meanwhile, back at the manor, Lady Claire's headdress is complete. Now comes the veil, a sheer silk that drapes down in waves, shimmering slightly in the candlelight. You have to admit, it's stunning. Also, it might be flammable. You make a mental note to keep her far from open flames. She turns to you, head held high, veil cascading behind her like a bridal banner. Now, she says, summon the painter. You blink. You're having a portrait done? Of course, she says. Hair like this can't be wasted. By nightfall, your own hair is a mess, frizzed from steam, crimped from braiding, and stubbornly trying to form a middle part despite your efforts. You rinse it in cold water mixed with a few drops of vinegar for shine, then tie it back in a loose knot. You think about Lady Claire's silk and wire, the weight of it all. You think about your mother, who wore her hair in a tight bun until the day she passed, and never once asked anyone to admire it. You think about freedom, and whether that's something you wear or something you undo. A moment of silence for all the weird and wonderful things people have done to their heads. Padding with lamb's wool. Dyeing hair with crushed berries. Boiling your hair in rainwater and herbs to give it movement. Using beer as a setting lotion. Yes, beer. Medieval mousse. Hair was never just hair. It was identity. Power. A battle cry wrapped in silk and stitched into shape. Even now, as you stretch your arms overhead and lie down to rest, you feel it, the invisible weight of expectation sitting right at your crown. So you let it go. Untwist the braid. Unpin the wrap. Let your scalp breathe. Let your thoughts fall loose like the strands you combed all day. And for once, don't worry about what anyone else might see. You wake up to birdsong and the faint smell of damp wool. The fire in the hearth has long since gone out, and the chill of morning clings to your skin like linen to wet hair. You stretch, feeling the ache in your shoulders from yesterday's braid marathon, and blink yourself back into consciousness. Today's adventure? Headwear. Yes, because if towering hairstyles weren't enough, now we need to talk about what medieval women wore on top of them. Tonight, we're journeying into the world of veils, wimples, and other head-covering contraptions that made hair care look like the easy part. Some were symbols of virtue, others of vanity, and some just made you question who had the time, the budget, or the neck strength. Ready? No pins required this time. Well, maybe just a few. You're summoned to the home of a merchant's wife named Marjorie, a woman with the voice of a goose and the social aspirations of a duchess. She greets you with a cheery squawk and a box full of folded cloth. "I'm going to church," she announces, "and I want to look devout. But in a fashionable way." Right. Because nothing says holy humility like linen origami on your head. You take stock of the options before you. A long veil embroidered with tiny blue flowers. A crisp white wimple that looks more like a fabric neck brace. A conical hennin with an attached chin strap, seriously. And a strange donut-shaped cap known as a turret. "Pick one," she says, fluttering her hands. "Something modest, but not boring." You suppress a sigh. Fashion theology is tricky business. Here's a quick crash course. In medieval Europe, head coverings weren't just about fashion. They were often required, especially for married women. The general belief? Hair equals vanity, and vanity equals sin. So, like a well-behaved woman of the time, you covered it. How you covered it, though, depended on your social rank, marital status, region, and how much you wanted to show off without technically breaking the rules. There were wimples, neck and chin wraps popular with older or religious women, barbettes and fillets, strappy bands with fabric caps, and even calls, which looked like hairnets if hairnets were made of gold thread and moral panic. And then there were the hennins. Yes, the hennins. Pointy hats so tall they'd scrape door frames. Worn primarily by noblewomen in Burgundy and France, hennins could reach up to 2 feet in height and were often paired with flowing silk veils that caught every passing breeze. Scholars still argue over how practical they were. Spoiler, they weren't. But fashion isn't about practicality, it's about making an entrance. Back at Marjorie's, she finally decides on the embroidered veil. You help her secure it with pins so sharp they could double as fencing swords, and smooth the fabric down over her shoulders. She beams at herself in the tiny mirror. "I look righteous, don't I?" You nod, though she mostly looks like she's planning to duel someone with a prayer book. As she walks away, you spot a folded scrap of lace in the bottom of her box. Curious, you lift it out. It's a frilled headband, stiff with starch and edged with pearls. Probably imported. Possibly cursed. You've seen that style before, on noblewomen at feast days or painted in frescoes, worn by women who had never done their own laundry. You wonder what it would feel like to wear something so frivolous. Then you wonder how anyone could sit upright in one for more than 5 minutes. Of course, not all head coverings were elegant. Some were downright terrifying. Like the escoffion, a massive horned headdress popular in 15th century England and France. Imagine 2 cinnamon rolls strapped to the sides of your head, wrapped in velvet and topped with a little crown. What? Well, some say it echoed the duality of womanhood. Others say it was inspired by Gothic architecture. Some historians think it was just a weird flex. And the church? Oh, they hated it. There are records of preachers publicly denouncing these horned monstrosities as prideful excess and the devil's antennae, which honestly would be a great band name. But women kept wearing them anyway, because if you're going to be accused of vanity, might as well commit. Not every region shared the same trends. In Italy, women preferred to braid their hair around their ears and wrap their heads in sheer veils embroidered with gold thread. In Germany, women wore Stucklein, linen turbans layered so precisely they looked like soufflés. In Spain, there were coif-style caps that clung tightly to the skull and left barely a whisper of hair visible. And across the Islamic world and parts of Byzantium, head coverings were equally intricate, woven from silk, secured with jeweled pins, and tied with a sense of both modesty and mathematical precision. It wasn't about hiding your hair. It was about curating your silhouette, creating a shape that said, "I belong here." Later that afternoon, you head to the market square. There's a cloth vendor selling imported veils from Flanders. You run your hands over the sheerest one, so thin it's almost like mist. The vendor tells you it's made from spider linen, though that's probably just marketing. You don't buy anything. But for a moment, you imagine yourself walking into a feast, veil trailing behind you like a comet. Someone turns to look, and you, without speaking, tell them everything. Of course, none of this is cheap. Maintaining multiple head coverings requires money, time, and at least one made with decent hand-eye coordination. Which is why most working-class women keep it simple. A scarf, a cap, a folded square of cloth tied at the nape. But even those carry meaning. A crisp white cap says you're clean and orderly. A bright-dyed head wrap says you're festive, confident, and possibly looking for a dance partner at the harvest fair. A rumpled kerchief? Tired? Over it? Don't talk to me until I've had my barley tea. By evening you're back home folding your own head wrap for tomorrow. It's not silk. It's not gold-threaded. It won't catch candlelight or attract painters. But it's yours. You run your fingers over the fabric, soft from years of washing, and think about everything a piece of cloth can carry. Desire, decorum, defiance. And every time you tie it, you're reminding the world that your thoughts are your own, even if your hair isn't always visible. You hear a knock at the door. It's your friend Agnes, breathless, clutching a scrap of parchment. You have to see this, she whispers and unrolls a crude sketch of a woman with a veil so long it trails behind her like a bridal train, and horns protruding from her temples like antlers. It's the Queen's new look, she says. Word from court. They say it's inspired by angels. You stare at the drawing. Angels, you echo blinking. Or goats. Honestly, it could go either way. But secretly, you kind of want to try it. So tonight, you dream of silk and antlers. Of hair that defies gravity. Of veils that whisper secrets with every step. And of a world where even the most absurd headpiece tells a story of who you are, where you come from, and where you dare to go next. Because sometimes putting on a ridiculous hat is the bravest thing you can do. Awaiting command, continue. You've finally gotten used to the art of hair rats, wire scaffolding, and headgear that could double as a sail. And now your next challenge arrives in the form of makeup. Yes, tonight we're taking a peek and a powder puff into the medieval beauty cabinet. You might imagine it as a delicate array of rose water, pearly salves, and maybe a little rouge. Try ground lead, stale dough, and whatever you can steal from the apothecary without getting yelled at. So pull up your wooden stool, crack open the walnut shell compact, and let's paint the medieval town pale. It's late morning and you've been summoned once again, not by nobility this time, but by an ambitious merchant's daughter named Isabel. She's in her early 20s, newly engaged, and determined to look like she belongs in an illuminated manuscript. Make me look divine, she says, fluttering her lashes. But also rich. And vaguely untouchable. You squint. Untouchable how? Like I've never once milked a goat. The dream. She gestures to a little chest of cosmetics, which looks more like a suspicious alchemy kit. Inside, chalk dust, beet juice, a dried-out slice of bread, and a pot of something that smells like it might eat through wood. You say nothing. Because at this point, you're just impressed she didn't hand you actual mercury. In medieval Europe, the concept of makeup, as we know it, wasn't exactly standardized. Women did use cosmetics, but subtly, and always under the pretense of health or spiritual purity. If you looked too painted, it was considered vain. If you looked just pale enough, it meant you were elegant, noble, and definitely not someone who spent her days in the sun growing turnips. So the goal? Pale skin, smooth texture, rosy lips and cheeks, but in a just woke up blessed kind of way. And that meant improvisation. No Sephora, no safety standards, just a lot of homebrewed guesses. Let's talk foundation. Forget liquid formulas or pressed powders. Your options are chalk or lead-based paste, which yes is toxic but gives a great matte finish. Wheat flour mixed with egg white, applied as a sort of face crust. Or vinegar-soaked breadcrumbs, dabbed on to refresh the complexion. Isabel chooses the egg flour. You smooth it across her face, careful to avoid the eyebrows, which, thank goodness, she's already plucked into near invisibility. She flinches. It smells like soup. That means it's working. She doesn't look convinced. Next, cheeks and lips. You crush a few dried rose hips in a linen pouch and press the powder to her skin. It gives a faint pinkish flush, enough to look healthy but not sinful. Then you touch her lips with the inside of a red beet slice. In some circles, women use sheep fat tinted with crushed cochineal bugs, yes, actual bugs, to create a glossy lip. But Isabel is squeamish. Don't worry, you say. Beets are much less bitey. Some women also whiten their teeth with burnt rosemary ash or rub salt across the gums to keep them pink. No toothbrushes. No minty breath. Just abrasive confidence. Historians still debate whether medieval people cared much about breath, but judging by the popularity of clove chewing and herbal mouth rinses, the answer is probably yes, but only on feast days. You pause and look at Isabel in the light. She glows, not in a radiant goddess kind of way, but in a slightly sticky, baked goods meets chemistry kind of way. So, she's happy. She twirls before the mirror. Do I look like someone who's never had dirt under her nails? You nod. Like someone who's never even seen dirt. Mission accomplished. Now, not all women had access to flour and beet juice. So people got creative. In some places, soot was mixed with oil to darken eyebrows, for those bold enough to have them at all. In others, crushed pearls were used to add shimmer to the skin. There are even records of women applying snake fat as a wrinkle cream. Yes, snake fat. And if that didn't work, you could always try urine. Fresh, of course. Some believed it cured pimples. You didn't ask whose idea that was. You didn't want to know. Of course, medieval beauty wasn't just about products. It was about symbolism. Pale skin meant wealth. You weren't toiling under the sun like common folk. Plucked hairlines meant elegance. High cheekbones hinted at virtue, and possibly anemia. A round face was the ideal. Sharp angles were associated with cunning. Which is why some women used plumpers, little waxy pads tucked into the cheeks to give them fullness. And the forehead? Ah yes, the eternal canvas. Some women applied a light vinegar wash daily to keep it smooth. Others dusted it with rice flour. And a few went full drama, coating their entire foreheads in white powder to match their head coverings and appear more ethereal. You could say it was the original Instagram filter. Isabel, now powdered and pink-cheeked, isn't done yet. Can you do something with my eyes? You blink. Like what? Make them deeper. Like I've seen tragedy. You think for a moment, then wet a bit of charcoal and carefully line the upper lid. She gasps. I look mysterious. Or mildly possessed. Perfect. There was, of course, backlash to all this beautification. Some clergy warned that wearing makeup was a sin against God's design. Others said it lured men into lust and would lead to your soul's eternal barbecue. One 14th century text even claimed that women who painted their faces would be recognized in hell by the colors of their cheeks. Which honestly sounds more like a Sephora ad than a curse. Yet still, women painted. Quietly. Carefully. Between prayers and chores, between restrictions and rituals. Because beauty wasn't about vanity. It was about agency. About carving a little space in the day to say, this is mine. By evening, you're washing the beet stains from your hands. You glance in the mirror and see your own face, unpainted, a little wind-chapped, but steady. And you think, maybe divine isn't about the powder. Maybe it's about the ritual. The way women create beauty out of scraps and stubbornness. Maybe it's the act of reclaiming your reflection. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, your dreams smell faintly of vinegar and rose water. You're in a candlelit room, surrounded by powders and petals, staring at yourself in a mirror that's slightly cracked, but still catching the light. You smile. Not because you look perfect, but because you look like you tried. And sometimes, in a world where everything is expected of you, trying is its own kind of rebellion. You wake up to the sound of a bell. Not a church bell or a market bell or even one of those cute little handbells that rich people ring when they want more honey cakes. No, this is the bell. The royal procession is coming through. Get your life together, bell. And if you live anywhere within 10 miles of the local castle, you know exactly what this means. Every woman in town is about to panic over what they're wearing, starting with their sleeves and ending with their waistlines. Yes, tonight we're talking about medieval fashion, specifically how women used clothing to express identity, signal class, and, let's be honest, try to survive the whims of royal-style trends that changed faster than you could say, sumptuary laws. So tighten your girdle, dust off your only pair of not mud-covered shoes, and prepare to experience the medieval runway. Spoiler, no one here is comfy. Let's start with you. You've got exactly one nice dress, and you only wear it for weddings, funerals, and royalty-induced public appearances. It's wool dyed a faded green with sleeves that are just barely fashionable, aka, you can't fit through a door sideways but you look incredible standing still. Your neighbor across the way, whose husband is a baker and therefore basically royalty in a town where bread is sacred, has 2 gowns. One is red, deep red, which means she probably spent way too much on imported dye or knows a guy who knows a monk who makes it on the side. You're jealous, but respectfully. You pull your dress over your shift, pin your neckline closed with your one good brooch, and begin the ancient and sacred act of pretending this is how you look all the time. Here's the thing about medieval women's fashion. It wasn't just fabric. It was full-on social armor. You could tell someone's status, marital situation, and income level just by looking at the width of her sleeves, the tightness of her bodice, the length of her train, long equals fancy, short equals practical, and the color of her gown. And here's the kicker, you had to be allowed to wear certain colors or fabrics. That's where sumptuary laws came in. These were actual legal rules that told people what they could and couldn't wear based on their class. No, seriously, there were laws like, no silk unless you're married to a knight or higher. No purple unless you own land or can trace your family to at least 3 generations of not peasants. If your hat has a feather longer than your thumb, we will take it off your head and fine you. Okay, that last one may be exaggerated, but barely. Historians still debate just how strictly these laws were enforced, but one thing is clear. They existed and they were designed to keep you in your lane. Literally. You couldn't walk into court looking like a duchess if you were a merchant's daughter. That's just asking for trouble. As you rush into the square to watch the royal procession, you pass a flurry of women adjusting hems, tying ribbons, and fluffing out sleeves like they're about to attend a medieval Met Gala. Some of the noble women on horseback are wearing houppelans, massive robe-like gowns with fur-trimmed sleeves that could double as tents. They look majestic. They also look deeply impractical. One of them sneezes and her sleeve nearly knocks over a small child. You spot your friend Cecily, a seamstress, muttering to herself. "What's wrong?" you ask. She scowls. "They're wearing side lacing again." You blink. "Is that bad?" "It's just back again. Last summer it was back lacing. Before that, buttons. Before that, you remember those stupid front ties?" You do. And you remember how impossible they were to untangle after a long day in the fields. Cecily sighs. It's like they want to make dressing a full-contact sport. While noble women parade around in fabric worth more than your house, you notice something fascinating. Even among the lower classes, there's subtle fashion warfare going on. A milkmaid with a brighter than usual apron ribbon. A washerwoman whose coif is folded just a little too fancily. Fashion is how you rebel, quietly, under the radar. Because even if you can't afford velvet, you can dye your wool with onion skins for a golden hue. Even if you can't buy silk, you can find a clever way to pleat your sleeves so they hang just right. Style isn't about having money. It's about having nerve. But fashion isn't just about showing off. Sometimes it's about hiding. Pregnancy? That could be concealed with a loose gown and clever lacing. Widows often wore head-to-toe black if they could afford the dye, and women in mourning were expected to dress simply with few ornaments. There were even mourning veils, delicate, sheer, and deeply dramatic. And then there was the wimple, that under-the-chin neck-wrapping piece of cloth that said, "I am respectable. I am modest. Also, I do not have time to worry about sunburn." A well-fitted wimple could be both a fashion statement and a social shield. But let's be honest, most women wore them because they were required to. Religious expectations shaped fashion as much as royal trends did. In some regions, women had to cover their hair completely once married. A bare head was scandalous, unless you were under 12 or on your wedding day. Even then, modesty had rules. And if you ignored those rules, well, let's just say the priest might find a subtle way to bring it up next Sunday during a sermon about temptation. Not that he's looking, of course. Never. By mid-afternoon, the procession ends and everyone slowly retreats to their lives. You pass women pulling up their skirts to avoid puddles. A few are limping. Turns out fashionable shoes aren't exactly made for cobblestones. One noble woman has her train carried by a literal child. You wonder if that's his job. Train bearer, age 6. Back in your home, you peel off your gown and stretch your arms overhead. You feel like you've run a marathon just from wearing clothes. But you also feel kind of proud. Because you made it work. You looked good, in your own way. And that's something. That night, as you sit by the fire, you patch a small tear in your sleeve. You think about Cecily and her frustration with trends. You think about the noble women weighed down by fabric and expectations. And you think about your mother's simple wool dress, the one she wore every winter, every feast day, every storm, and how she never once apologized for it. Because real style, it's not what you wear, it's how you wear it. So you fold your dress carefully. You smooth the creases, tuck the sleeves, and whisper a quiet thank you to it, like a knight to their armor. And as you lie down to sleep, the echoes of the day's fashion parade still swirl in your head. Sleeves swinging like pendulums, veils fluttering in candlelight, gowns rustling like whispers of silk and ambition. And you? You rest easy, knowing you survived another day in a world where how you dress can mean everything. Even if all you've got is a little green wool and a whole lot of attitude. You wake up to a new kind of silence. The kind that comes when the birds haven't even started gossiping yet and the hearth is still cool from last night's embers. It's the kind of silence that whispers, something important is happening today. And you're right. Because today you're going to church. Not for a feast day or a wedding or even one of those vaguely unsettling processions involving relics and a lot of incense. No. Today you're going because it's time for confession. Which means it's also time to make sure your soul and your appearance are ready for judgment. By God, by your neighbors, and of course by the resident expert in public piety and silent shaming, the priest's housekeeper. Tonight, we're stepping into the world of piety, purity, and performance. How medieval women had to manage not just their faith, but the very visible ways they were expected to embody it. Spoiler, it's less about what's in your heart and more about what's on your head. The first step, getting dressed. Again. Because as always, clothing is a sermon, and today you need to say, I am humble, devout, and definitely not thinking impure thoughts about the blacksmith's son. That means hair hidden, neckline high, a gown, dull, preferably in a color that says, I could afford blue, but I chose gray out of modesty. You reach for your best wimple, a simple linen wrap that covers everything from the base of your throat to the crown of your head. It's not flattering, but that's the point. Looking good while appearing humble is basically medieval level 10 difficulty. Let's talk spiritual fashion coding. In medieval Europe, particularly after the 12th century, the church took an increasingly firm grip on what it meant to be a proper woman. Modesty wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. Not by guards or police, but by the stares of your peers and the pointed silence of your local clergy. You've heard sermons about it. You've sat through sermons about it. Clothes that are too tight? Temptation. Hair showing under your veil? Vanity. Shoes with too much shape? Pride. And don't even think about jewelry unless you're mourning someone or it's shaped like a cross. One scholar put it best: in some regions, women were expected to dress like saints but still raise children, cook 3 meals, and never complain about lice. Academic circles still debate just how strict these norms were across classes. But even peasants were expected to keep up appearances when the priest walked by, especially on confession day. You arrive at church just after dawn. The pews are hard, the floor is cold, and the air smells faintly of wax, wood, and something you hope isn't last year's Easter lamb. You lower your head as the priest begins morning prayers. Your veil slips. You fix it. It slips again. You pin it tighter until you feel it tug at your scalp. Humility is pain. After prayers comes confession. And you, like every woman here, know the real performance is not in what you confess, but in how you deliver it. Too guilty? Suspicious? Too cheerful? Unrepentant? Too detailed? Definitely hiding something. So you keep your voice soft, your eyes downcast, and your sins carefully curated. Lost your temper with your sister? Confess. Fantasized about a better life where you didn't have to scrub vegetables for 3 hours a day? Maybe not. Forgot to say grace last Tuesday? Definitely mention it. That one's safe and relatable. The priest listens, nods, offers a penance involving candles or prayers or, if he's in a mood, bread for the poor. You leave with a mix of relief and low-grade anxiety, wondering if he could tell you left something out. You always can. Probably. But confession isn't just about sin. It's about social cleansing. This is your spiritual reset, yes, but also your public reset. Everyone saw who lined up. Everyone will note who left with red eyes and who looked smugly serene. In a town this size, your religious reputation is your social credit score. The more devout you appear, the more trustworthy you are. And for a woman, trustworthiness means good wife material, safe to gossip with, unlikely to be accused of dancing with the devil in the woods. You once saw a girl publicly shamed for skipping Sunday Mass 3 times. She claimed she was sick. The priest claimed she was consorting with spirits. She was 12. Of course, religion wasn't always this bleak. There were also festivals, feast days, processions, and mystery plays. You loved the ones with angels descending from behind the altar on ropes. Occasionally, one would get stuck mid-air, and everyone would pretend it was a holy pause rather than a rope snag. But even then, especially then, your role was to observe. Quietly. Modestly. You remember one May Day celebration where a girl danced in her shift, reed, thin underdress, and half the village reacted like she'd set the monastery on fire. Her mother claimed she was bewitched by fairies. Her father claimed it was just warm out. The priest said she needed a week of fasting and daily prayers. Everyone else just whispered for months. You return home after confession and begin your penance. Stall. It's long. It involves saying, "Forgive me," more times than you've said your own name this week. You light a candle and watch the flame flicker. You think about purity, and how it's always something you're supposed to maintain but never define. How every stain on your dress feels like a stain on your soul. How every mistake you make somehow feels louder when you're a girl. Your younger cousin visits in the afternoon. She's about 9. Covered in flour. Braids askew. Absolutely zero concept of shame. She says, "I saw the priest trip on his robe today." You try not to smile. Fail. She says, "He looked like a goose." You say, "Don't say that." But also you nod. Because he did. As night falls, you unpin your veil and fold it neatly. You hang your dress by the fire, brush the dust from your shoes, and sit down with a piece of dry bread and goat cheese. It's not much, but it feels earned. You survived another day of invisible rules. You navigated shame and virtue and managed not to cry when you pinched your scalp on that final veil pin. And somehow, beneath it all, you still feel like yourself. Not a saint. Not a sinner. just a girl trying her best with what little she has. As you lie down, you stare at the rafters and listen to the wind scratch gently at the shutters. You think of all the women who came before you, who confessed their fears, bit their tongues, wrapped their hair, and whispered prayers they barely understood because they were told it kept them good. You think of the ones who dared to question. You think of the ones who didn't. And you hope, deep in your bones, that maybe being good doesn't mean being quiet or small or scared. Maybe it just means trying. Honestly, quietly, persistently, like lighting a candle in the dark even if no one sees it. So you breathe, and let your shoulders drop, and feel the linen loosen around your head. And in the hush of the moment, you smile because for once no one is watching. And maybe, just maybe, that's when your soul shines the brightest. The rooster crows like it owns the place. Which, to be fair, it kind of does. Because while you might technically live here, he's the one who wakes the entire village every morning with his unnecessary confidence and unwavering punctuality. It's still dim outside, the kind of blue-gray light that makes everything look a bit unreal, and you're already up, rubbing your eyes and muttering something unholy under your breath about poultry. But you don't have time to complain. Because today, you bleed. Not in the dramatic battlefield sense, though it certainly feels that way sometimes, but in the quietly whispered linen hide the laundry kind of way. Yes, today we're talking about periods in the Middle Ages. Welcome to that very real, very underdocumented part of medieval womanhood that's equal parts inconvenience, superstition, and surprisingly practical ingenuity. This is going to get personal, historically and biologically. Let's begin. You feel the familiar ache in your lower back and that strange bloated sensation that makes your shift feel a size too small. You sneak out of the sleeping loft as quietly as possible because the last thing you want right now is someone asking you to churn butter. You head for the stream behind the cottage. You're carrying 2 pieces of linen, one to rinse, one already tucked into place beneath your layers. No one talks about this. Not really. Your mother told you what to expect when you were 11. She said, "It means your body is strong." Then she handed you some cloth and told you to never speak of it in front of your brothers. You didn't? Still don't. So, what did medieval women do during their periods? Let's break it down. Pads and linens. Women used folded linen rags, often called clouts. These were washed, dried discreetly, and reused. If you were rich, maybe you had soft wool or even imported absorbent cloth. If you were poor, well, moss was not out of the question. Yes, moss. Belt systems. Some women used a primitive belt and string system to hold their cloth in place. Think of it as a medieval sanitary belt, strapped around the waist with ties holding the padding where needed. Not super comfy, but better than staining your only good gown. No protection? No problem? For peasant women working the fields, some evidence suggests they occasionally let it flow. Shocking? A bit. But when you only own 2 dresses and the stream's a half-mile walk, you do what you can. The smell they'd mask with herbs sewn into their girdles. Of course, no discussion of menstruation in the Middle Ages would be complete without the superstitions. Some of them were a lot. For example, a menstrual blood curdles wine. Probably just bad wine. A menstruating woman can kill crops by walking through a field. Sorry, cabbage patch. Or menstrual blood attracts demons. No explanation offered. Just vibes. One 13th century text claimed a woman on her period shouldn't need bread or look at mirrors. Another said that menstrual blood could cure leprosy if applied correctly. Do not try that. Historians are still arguing about how widespread these beliefs actually were. Some think they were mostly male anxieties written into books no one read. Others argue they influenced laws and daily practices more than we realize. Either way, you grow up absorbing the rules even if no one ever writes them down. Your friend Agnes, 2 doors down, swears by tansy tea for her cramps. You tried it once. It tasted like grass and regret. Your mother prefers to lie still with a warm stone at her belly. You just work through it. Because cows still need milking. Porridge still needs stirring. And the world does not stop for a little internal chaos. But you do allow yourself a moment by the stream, just watching the water move, imagining that somewhere far away someone else is doing the same thing. Maybe in a castle, maybe in a cottage. Bleeding, hiding, breathing. And not saying a word. There's one thing that's both comforting and maddening. Men don't get it. At all. You've overheard them say things like, "She's in a mood, must be her time. Don't let her near the beer barrels." Women and their blood magic. Blood magic. As if your uterus is plotting something. Your uncle once told your cousin's husband not to let her pray at the altar during her days, because it might offend the saints. The saints apparently are very sensitive. But what's interesting, what no one talks about, is how periods also become these quiet alliances between women. Agnes sneaks you an extra linen strip when yours are drying slow. Your aunt distracts your brothers while you change behind the fire screen. Your grandmother once told you, pain makes you pay attention. Pay attention to what it's teaching you. You didn't understand that then. You still kind of don't. But you think about it now as your stomach cramps and your patience wears thin. And you realize, there is power in this. Not flashy power, but something deeper, more ancient, the kind that bleeds quietly and survives. By midday you're back to work. The ache in your belly is dull now, steady. A background hum. You sweep. You wash carrots. You accidentally snap at your sister when she asks too many questions about Thatch. You apologize. Sort of. She shrugs. Is it your time? You nod. She hands you the last slice of honey bread. Silent treaty. That night, you tuck yourself into bed, linen folded beside you, cool against your leg. You wonder how many women before you did this exact same thing. You wonder how many kept going month after month, year after year, carrying this quiet rhythm like a second heartbeat. You wonder if, centuries from now, someone will be lying in bed just like you, wondering about you. Probably not. But maybe. As you drift off, your body still warm and sore and humming, you think, this is not weakness. This is not shame. This is the drumbeat beneath every story, every birth, every line of every family tree. And even when no one sees it, even when no one talks about it, this too is part of your power. It's late. The hearth has burned down to soft embers. Your bones feel tired in the best way, like you've earned this rest, and your hands smell faintly of lavender and something sour you can't quite place. But before you close your eyes, there's one more ritual to get through. You reach for the box. It's made of old wood, smooth soft at the corners by years of handling. You pull it from the chest at the end of the bed, set it gently in your lap, and lift the lid. Inside, combs, pins, a little folded note from your sister that says, "Don't marry the miller," and, most precious of all, jewelry. Nothing fancy. No sapphires or saint-blessed gold. But pieces with weight. Memory. A chipped brooch from your grandmother. A twisted copper ring you got when your cousin left for the convent. And a little worn necklace shaped like a flower, pressed tin, painted once, long faded. These are the things you wear to remind yourself who you are. But in the world outside, jewelry was a whole different game. So tonight, let's talk accessories, specifically how medieval women used jewelry and decoration not just to look pretty, but to signal power, protect their bodies, and even tell little lies. First, the basics. You probably already know this. In medieval Europe, jewelry was far more than decoration. It was code. A visible language. And like all languages, it had rules and loopholes. Let's say you're walking into a feast, head high, sleeves wide, and fingers positively dripping with rings. What do people see? Not just wealth, not just style. They see your marital status, rings on certain fingers. Your family heritage, crests, emblems, insignia. Your moral standing, yes, really, virtuous women wore simpler pieces. And, depending on the gemstones, your magical protections. Because oh yes, gemstones weren't just sparkly. They were believed to do things. For example, rubies, said to protect against poison and bad dreams. Helpful, considering how often both showed up. Emeralds, supposedly shattered if someone nearby told a lie. Drama. Sapphires, thought to bring calm and protect chastity. Naturally very popular in nunneries. Amber, common among rural women. People believed it helped with fertility and warded off illness. And don't even get started on coral. Coral beads were everywhere. Around necks, sewn into sleeves, even dangled from babies' cradles. They were believed to protect against the evil eye, ease teething pain, and prevent sudden death. Which, let's be honest, was a pretty daily concern. Of course, not everyone could afford real stones. But that didn't stop them. You, for instance, have one very convincing glass garnet that you bought at the market 2 summers ago. It catches the light just right when you turn your head at dinner. Your cousin says it looks fake. But what does she know? She once wore a chicken feather in her cap to impress a boy who couldn't read. Everyone's faking something. But here's where it gets interesting. Jewelry as protest. Yep. Even in the rigid world of medieval beauty standards, women found quiet ways to push back, and accessories were part of that rebellion. In certain city-states like Venice and Florence, women began wearing unusual brooches or colored ribbons to signal things like widowhood, but not mourning, virginity, but only legally, engaged to a man but don't actually like him. This one was unofficial, but the meaning was understood. There were even secret tokens passed between women, rings inscribed with little poems, bracelets that opened to reveal pressed herbs, or carved ivory pendants with tiny hidden compartments. Messages, potions, or maybe secrets. Scholars still debate whether some of these were simply sentimental or part of bigger, silent networks between women, friendships, alliances, maybe even resistance. Because when your words aren't allowed to go far, your decorations have to speak louder. Back in your own house, you're helping your sister get ready for the market fair. She's nervous. There's a boy there she hopes will notice her. You don't say much. Just help her braid her hair, pin it in a crown, and then, before she leaves, you slip your old tin flower necklace over her head. It's not lucky, you say, but it remembers things. She grins and goes. Later that night, when the wind howls outside and the candle's flickering its last breath, you find yourself staring into the little mirror again. Not to check your face, but to study the line of your collarbone. The soft place where necklaces fall. The way light hits metal and makes it feel alive. And you think, adornment has never been about need. It's about ritual, belonging, hope. Vanity, yes, but also survival. It's how you armor up before walking into a world that doesn't always know how to see you. And sometimes, it's just because you want to feel lovely. And that's reason enough. You remove your last ring, the one that always gets stuck on your finger when it's hot, and drop it back into the box with a soft clink. Then you close the lid. You lie back, and sleep finally comes, adorned with dreams. Hey, tonight's our last chapter. Can you believe that? You've made it through vinegar washes, eyebrow annihilation, horned veils, and beer mousse. At this point, you could probably walk into a medieval court, strike a pose, and not even flinch when someone offers you powdered lead as highlighter. But tonight, it's time to talk about what happens after all that effort. Not the getting ready part, but the moment you walk out the door. The moment you're seen. Because beauty in medieval times wasn't just personal, it was public. Judged, ranked, recorded in church books and royal scrolls. And sometimes, weaponized. So let's talk about judgment, danger, and the female gaze. How women survived a world where beauty could bless you one day and burn you the next. You step out into the street. Your veil is in place. Your shoes are clean. Your hair is tucked in just the right way that says, I am modest but not invisible. You've even pinched your cheeks a bit for color. Gently though, you still remember last week's bruise. And still, you can feel it. The stares. The expectations. The way a woman walking alone gets marked and measured in silence. Because in medieval Europe, a beautiful woman walking unaccompanied was suspicious. She might be a merchant's wife, a midwife, a widow on her way to church, or she might be, gasp, a woman with choices. And that made people very uncomfortable. In towns like Avignon and Florence, city councils actually issued ordinances limiting what women could wear. Too many pearls? Fine. A hem too long? Fine. A crimson belt with gold stitching and perfume? That was practically an arrestable offense. These weren't just fashion rules. They were a system of control. Sumptuary laws, they were called, rules designed to enforce social class through clothing. But of course women bore the brunt of them. Because nothing said dangerous like a woman who looked too good and didn't apologize for it. And God help you if you looked good and poor. Many working women were accused of being sex workers simply for looking too decorated. A ribbon here, a bit of rouge there, and suddenly you were gossip fodder for the whole town. To be clear, most of these accusations were false. But the fear? Very real. And the church wasn't any easier. Clergy often gave sermons warning women not to inflame lust with their appearance. And if a man sinned after seeing you, well, that was kind of your fault. There's a 13th century preacher who once said that a woman who wears jewels is no better than a lantern, shining on the outside but full of smoke within. Charming. Even worse, women were expected to be beautiful enough to attract husbands, but modest enough to seem pious. That's a balance beam no one walks without falling. But here's what the sermons didn't mention. Sometimes women knew exactly what they were doing. They learned how to tilt their veils to catch the light. How to dye a gown just subtle enough to suggest wealth, without tipping into scandal. How to laugh softly, one hand near the lips, and make everyone lean closer. Was a game, a risk, but also a skill. One of the most fascinating accounts comes from a 15th century diary written by a French merchant's daughter. In it, she describes watching her mother dress for church, carefully choosing earrings that would swing just enough to be noticed. She said it was like a fishing line, the daughter wrote. You throw it out and see who bites. Now, historians debate whether this diary was real or an embellishment from later centuries, but either way, it tells the truth. Women knew the rules. They just didn't always follow them. But the stakes were high. In some regions, if a woman was accused of seducing a man, especially a man of power, she could be put on trial. Not for adultery. Not for theft. But for bewitchment. Yep. Which trials often focused on unnatural beauty as evidence of sorcery. A woman with perfect skin? Clearly using potions. A widow who didn't age fast enough? Must be consorting with demons. A midwife who wore perfume? Dangerous. Even perfectly natural features could become suspicious if you had too many of them at once. Too graceful, too clever, too confident, too lovely. The world always feared women who seemed like they knew. But through all of this, through laws and sermons and trials, women found ways to survive. They used beauty as a shield, as a mirror, as a question no one could quite answer, and sometimes, as a joke. Because who said you can't wear pearls and smuggle cheese in your sleeves? Side note, that actually happened. A 14th century German housewife was fined for hiding contraband cheese in her cuffs while wearing a church dress. History doesn't record whether the cheese was delicious, but we choose to believe it was. Back in your own little room, you're sitting by candlelight, writing a letter to your cousin. You tell her about the new cloak you bought. The tailor who tried to upsell you silver thread. The baker's apprentice who blushed when you thanked him for the warm bread. You don't say everything. But between the lines you tell her that you feel alive. That even with all the weight of being watched, being measured, being judged, you are still here. Still dressing. Still walking. Still choosing. Tomorrow you'll pin your hair again. You'll walk through the square with your best shoes and your softest scarf. You'll look at the sky and maybe, not today but soon, you'll meet someone's eyes and smile. Not for them, but for yourself. Because in a world that tries to control what beauty means, there is one quiet, fierce rebellion that always remains. You get to decide. Hey, you're still here. That in itself is kind of impressive. You've survived medieval skin bleach, forehead plucking, meat-based lipstick, corset-induced internal rearrangements, and more hair rats than you ever wanted to know existed. You've helped noble women pin their hennons high, rinsed your scalp in vinegar, and whispered prayers before applying bear grease under your eyes. You've watched fashion shift with monarchs and moralists, navigated religious rules about veils and virtue, and survived both real and metaphorical flames. And now here you are, in your own space, in your own body, in this very moment, safe, warm, and gloriously unplucked. So before you drift into dreams, let's take a moment to look back. Not just at what medieval beauty demanded, but at how women survived it. Scroll it started, remember, in the raw morning light of medieval Europe. A world of wooden floors and cold water, of illness and incense, where your reflection wasn't a crisp mirror but maybe the surface of a pewter plate or the gleam of your face in the river. And yet, you still saw yourself. Even then, even without Instagram filters or LED-lit vanities, beauty mattered. It always had. Not because women were vain, but because beauty was currency. Safety. A way to rise. A way to vanish. A way to tell the world, I belong here. You plucked your forehead because it made you look noble. You bleached your skin because paleness meant status. You darkened your lashes with soot not because you loved suffering, but because beauty was the language you were taught to speak, long before you had a say in the grammar. But the real miracle? You didn't just follow the rules. You bent them. Leaf fluttering in wind, you mixed your own remedies, sometimes safer, sometimes sketchier, always born of knowledge passed woman to woman in whispered recipes and shared secrets. You learned that elderflower softened your skin, that beetroot brightened your cheeks, and that if you were truly desperate, you could crush pearls into powder and hope your nose didn't fall off. Mercury, not your friend. You took what little autonomy you were allowed and turned it into ritual. Which, honestly, that's kind of beautiful. And then there was the hair. Oh, the hair. Braided, coiled, padded, wired, horned, twisted, veiled, and occasionally so high it needed scaffolding. Hairstyles became a kind of silent sermon. On class, on piety, on availability. You didn't just style your hair. You constructed it. And even when it pulled too tight or gave you neck aches or became a fire hazard in candlelight, you still did it. Not out of vanity, but out of something deeper. Out of hope. Out of survival. Lotion bottled, the products were wild. Beer as mousse. Crushed berries as blush. Ox fat. Egg yolk. Vinegar. Boiled cow hooves for shine. Burned rosemary for volume. And always, lavender tucked into sleeves, into soap, into silence. You didn't have a Sephora, but you had ingenuity. A pantry was a potion cabinet. The kitchen was a cosmetic lab. And sure, some of it burned. Some of it stank. But it wasn't foolishness, it was strategy. You were doing the best you could with what you had, and what you had was a belief that beauty could open doors. Because sometimes, it actually did. Crown fashion changed with every king, pope, and scandal. You remember? You adjusted hemlines with regimes. Covered your elbows when modesty was in. Uncovered your neckline when it was en vogue. Wore symbolic jewelry to express loyalty, rebellion, or flirtation. You didn't just wear clothes. You wore codes. A sleeve wasn't just a sleeve. It was a page on which a woman wrote her intentions. And when the sumptuary laws told you what colors you were allowed to wear, you found a way to sneak a forbidden shade into your embroidery, or dye the underside of your cloak a secret, scandalous crimson. Rebellion stitched by hand. Ring, even your accessories had layers. Rings told people your family's rank. Coral beads whispered that you were hoping for a baby. A specific pin placement meant, I am spoken for, but not entirely willing. A little pouch of herbs? Maybe protection. Maybe just perfume. Maybe poison. It depended who asked. Adornment wasn't just for beauty. It was magic. Identity. A little armor against a world that didn't always want you to take up space. Balance scale, and through it all, you carried the weight of contradiction. Be modest but attractive. Be pale but not sickly. Be sensual but pure. Be graceful but practical. Be devout but beautiful, especially if your husband paid a painter. If that sounds familiar, well, maybe not as much has changed as we like to think. But here's what you also did. You survived. And that wasn't a passive thing. It wasn't about just enduring. It was resistance in its quietest, fiercest form. You found joy in the mirror. You laughed with your friends while trying out new concoctions. You taught your daughters how to braid hair, how to make a salve for blisters, how to judge a man not just by his title but by whether he noticed when you wore a new pendant. And maybe you didn't change the world, but you made sure the world didn't completely erase you. That matters. That endures. Sheaf of rice beauty in the medieval world was never simple. It was about class, marriage, morality, survival. But under all those layers, it was also about you. About how you saw yourself in a world that rarely asked how you felt. About how you reclaimed space, even if it was just the space on your own cheekbones or the line of your veil or the color of your sleeve. And if history didn't always write your name down, your choices still shaped the page. So what do we carry forward now? After 15 chapters, 60,000 plus words, and one long winding walk through the powdered, perfumed, occasionally painful path of medieval womanhood, here's what you've learned. Sparkles that beauty is never frivolous. Sparkles that rituals are resistance. Sparkles that every woman in every age has looked in a mirror and wondered who she is, and shaped the answer with whatever tools she had. Sparkles that survival is often quiet and clever. Sparkles and that dignity can exist in the smallest acts. Tying a ribbon, washing your hair, passing down a recipe. You don't have to love the medieval standards. You just have to appreciate the women who lived through them. And now that you've walked in their shoes, corseted, padded, embroidered, and all, you understand that those women weren't weak. They were brilliant, and stubborn, and worthy of every ounce of storytelling we've poured out in their honor. The fire is nearly out now. The moon is high. You've set down the veil, unpinned your braids, and laid your hands flat against your chest. No rings, no rouge, just you. You survived it all. Not just the history, but the expectations. And tomorrow? You'll wake up in your own time, in your own body, and choose what beauty means to you. Maybe it's lip balm and clean hair. Maybe it's bold liner and loud earrings. Maybe it's nothing at all. And whatever it is, it's yours. Completely, fully, freely yours. Good night, lovely one. You've earned your rest. And now you're lying still, hair loose across your pillow, the stories of centuries quietly tangled in every imagined strand. All those women, anonymous and legendary, who sat before cracked mirrors or river reflections or candlelit glass, wondering if they looked just right, or if they looked too right. You can still feel them. The girl with the crushed berries for blush. The woman who whispered her secrets into rosemary oil. The widow who tied her veil with trembling hands but looked up with steel in her gaze. Their rituals might seem strange, funny, or even absurd now, but underneath every braid and silk thread was the same longing. To be seen, to be chosen, to belong, and also to resist. They didn't all survive unscathed. Some faded into quiet corners of history, their names lost. Others left behind portraits, poems, scandals. A few carved space for rebellion through ribbons and rouge. And tonight, you carry a little piece of each of them. Not because you followed their rules, but because you dared to imagine what it felt like. Even now, as you breathe slower, the weight of medieval velvet replaced by the comfort of your own blankets, something lingers. A softness, a strength. You made it. Through powders and politics. Through plucked brows and whispered sermons. Through all the invisible crowns history asked you to wear and take off. So close your eyes. Let the echoes settle. Let your beauty, strange and stubborn and wholly your own, be enough. Because it always was. Because it always will be.